Well, the donkey and ogre are back to help us out again, and it says here they're going to teach us something about momentum conservation. So let's see what happens this time. Looks like they're trying to scale that wall again, right? So the ogre has put the donkey into a cannon. This is getting more and more fun, right? I think each time he does this, something new and interesting happens. And he says, if you get launched by that cannon there, you could throw a rope down and I could climb up. Sounds like a reasonable plan for the ogre, at least, right? I'm sure Donkey doesn't necessarily like the plan, right? Because the plan's going to involve him going through the air like that. And maybe Donkey's worried about what happens here, right? Maybe it could even be dangerous earlier. I don't know if he even survives the getting shot, right? But so he says, wait a minute. The cannon is free to roll, which means the net force is 0 and momentum is conserved. So is there anything wrong with what he said there? I mean, I think he's I left up some of the notes from the last example. And at the bottom here, I'd said net force is equal to 0 implies delta P is equal to 0, which basically means momentum is conserved. Momentum will not change, is what, maybe a more direct English statement of what that equation says. So unless there's something wrong with Donkey's statement about the net force is 0 and, that seems correct. And I think since, the one thing you could say is, well, if the cannon, if it were like nailed down or something like that, and, maybe if there's recoil type of forces, then there could be some force applied to the cannon, right? But he's saying since it's free to roll, you could say, well, normal force and gravity force cancel out, but since it's free to roll, there's not going to be any kind of like friction force or any other kind of force applied to the cannon. Although a question we could ask is, does he really mean just the cannon and not himself? I think he's including himself in this, right? Because if he didn't include himself, we could definitely say that could be an interaction. I mean, I think there's clearly going to be an interaction. If you get shot out of a cannon, the cannon is obviously pushing on you, right? And by Newton's third law, you'd have to in some way push back on the cannon. So in that sense, like Donkey would be wrong about his conclusion about net force unless he includes himself in the system, right? So he's clearly cannon plus Donkey is the system he's talking about there. And I'm looking at that carefully because we know Donkey has sometimes been a little slippery about what systems he's talking about. Anyway, so Ogre says, right, I guess he's following him so far. And he says, so I won't be able to get the needed momentum to get up there. And maybe one way of looking at that statement and what could be wrong with it, since we just clearly said his system was cannon plus Donkey, and now he's talking about himself, so maybe has he switched the system to just Donkey? Maybe, maybe not. If he hasn't, though, one way that he could achieve momentum is if somehow the total momentum for him plus the cannon remained the same, right? And I think that's the approach that the ogre's going to take to interpreting what Donkey says. He says, but the cannon will have momentum in the opposite direction. So what is Ogre really saying there? Donkey can have momentum pointing to the right. That is part of what lets him get shot up over the castle wall. But the cannon will recoil to the left. And so even though the system starts with 0 momentum, it could still have 0 momentum because it would have two different parts, each with equal but oppositely directed momentum, right? I don't know if Donkey can wrap his head around that because he says both get momentum from nothing. Inconceivable. But Ogre says the total momentum is 0 since it is a vector. So it is conceivable, actually, because of the fact that momentum is a vector, and therefore you can have parts of a system with one direction of momentum, another part of the system the opposite direction momentum that started with 0 momentum. And if you've argued it's a closed system or closed enough system, or in other words, net force was 0 on your system, that can still happen. So part of the system can still gain a lot of velocity potentially as a result of an interaction within that system, right? And I guess the ogre is going to show us that that is possible because he just pulled the trigger. Poor Donkey, I think. Maybe this is, like I said, what Donkey was really worried about here. And Ogre just says, see, it works, now throw a rope.